I'm Loretta Hayes from Hayes Sewing Machine Company in Wilmington, Delaware, and welcome back to our creative videos. This morning, I'm going to show you a really quick table runner, something that you could do with the scraps in your stash, or if you have a charm pack, which is 5-inch squares, you would need 27 of the charms. So super simple to cut out, particularly if you're doing a charm pack, because most of it is cut out for you. So the pattern that I'm using is a Villa Rosa design, and it is called BLISSFUL. The table runner, as the directions have it, is 17 inches by 44. It has a small border around it. And so basically what you need to do this, you need 27 5-inch charm squares, and then you need a ½ yard of background fabric for your little corners and your borders. So when you are looking, I am using today the Dragonfly Dance from Canvas. If I flip this around, Pam, you may be able to see that, and if you can page down, and we've laid out some charm squares for there. But of course, this is going to work with any charm square package that you would like to do. So your first step is going to be to cut out 52 2-inch squares from your additional fabric away from the charm squares. Once you've got the squares trimmed out, you're going to take it and you're going to draw a line diagonally. So I usually just use my Choco marker. I always like to have a smaller rotary ruler for drawing, so you're not wielding the big rotary ruler. And you're simply going to take and draw a line from corner to corner. We're then going to take our charm squares and we are going to place a square in the corner of the charm squares. And a lot of charm squares are cut with this pinked edge. So what you want to do is kind of decide where you're going to line it. Are you going to line it up with the outside of the pink or the inside of the pinking? That way you're consistent all the way through your blocks. Now, the key to this, because we're going to do this mass production, the key to this is the line should always be going from one side of the block to the other side of the block. If you ever find yourself sewing to a corner, stop at that point. Luckily, it's a 2-inch block. It won't take very much to pull it out. But I go ahead and I line up the blocks on all of my squares on one side. So we're going to go ahead and sew those. And your machine is not going to be, nothing extraordinary for the setup on the machine. I personally like to work with my regular foot when I am doing the drawing of the lines and sewing of the lines. We will switch a little bit later to our 1/4-inch foot, but what I often do, my 1/4-inch foot has that guide, and as I'm sewing along, it tends to drag on the square. So if you use your regular foot, you've got that lovely line that they've etched right into the center. So we can go ahead and we can just line up the line with our drawn line, and then off we go. So I will sew until I'm about 1/4 inch from the end. I'll then pick up my next one. I'll line up that. I'll pick up my next one. And even if you're sewing on the air for a few seconds, because the thread is attached to the previous one, you'll find that everything will feed out really well. So we'll come in, you will do that 27 times. So you will have 27 squares that have got a little square attached to the corner. Once I've got that done, I like to snip them apart so they're easy to maneuver. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. So we're going to line up our 2-inch square, making sure that our lines are going from side to side. And so we'll tuck under that, and we'll just go ahead and get our other one set up as well. So this, if you're doing a charm square pack, super, super cool, because we didn't even have to cut these larger squares. It's a great way if you just want to do a quick change on decor, if you want to do a quick gift. I was talking to a lady in the store yesterday. She's been doing a bunch of craft shows. So something like this would be really nice for that, because it's a really fast cutout and a really fast sew. All right, so you would do 27, and you should end up with squares that look like this, where we have 2 squares on the corners, opposite corners, and the seam is going from the side of the charm square to the side of the charm square. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut and get rid of the outside triangle on the charm square. So as we're trimming, we're going to come in, and I often trim this just with my regular scissors. It isn't critical that it's a perfect 1/4 inch. So we can come in and trim. I suppose if you put your rotary ruler to it and cut them perfectly, that you would have perfect triangles that you could sew together. But in my life, that's way too small. If you like to make miniature quilts, it would be a lovely idea, because you would have a bunch of them. All right, those are trimmed up, and we are headed over to the ironing board. So when we get to the ironing board, what we would like is we would like to press the triangle towards that outside corner. So my seam allowances, unless I have an issue with contrast where, my block is black and my corners are white and it's going to shadow through, unless that's a situation like that, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to press towards the seam allowances towards the purple triangle every single time. And so I like to press from the top side, because I'll get a nice flat seam. You're less likely to get an accordion seam that way. And we'll come in and we'll press all of our blocks.
Can you move your other hand out of the way? There you go.
No problems. All right, so you should have a whole series of blocks that look like this.
Yep.
All right, let's head back to the table again. And in the pattern, they will tell you to arrange your blocks. You're going to arrange them in 9 rows of 3 blocks. So you're going to have 3 blocks going here. Now I did mine, this is the start of my Tablerunner here. I did mine exactly as the picture in the pattern told me. So basically I have my charm squares all going kind of diagonally. They're pointing to the left. But keep in mind that there are many layouts. So long as you are doing 3 block rows, there's nothing that says you couldn't come in and you could play games with your corners. So we could come in and do, something along that line. And then we could come in and they would connect up going there. So you can monkey around with them as to how you're laying them out. Certainly the easiest is the way the pattern is, because we don't have to think about keeping things coordinated. the blocks are all going to go the same direction. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to lay out our last two rows here. And the only thing that I pay attention to when I'm working with my layout is, you know, you're going to have some fabrics that are definitely more dominant. You can see like these black dragonflies, and really the darker blocks are quite dominant when you get the table runner done. So when I'm looking at this, I've got quite a bit of black on this end. So I want to have kind of a similar idea over here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a couple of little trial layouts here. You'll notice that the angle is still going the same way. So we'll come in and we'll pop this one. So maybe we'll do this one here. See, if I put this one here, you would see that I'm really close to that one. So we're just kind of doing a nice, pleasing layout. And that looks pretty good. I think we'll go with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up our 3 blocks in this row and we're going to join them together. And this would be where I would change my foot onto a 1/4 inch seam allowance foot. So you're still going to be on the straight stitch, and we're just going to come in right sides together. My machine is asking me what foot I've got on, so we'll be nice and tell it what I've got. Of course, it's foot number 57, so I have to scroll all the way down to the bottom. All right, we are in good shape. Now the machine should be happy. Awesome. So we're going to sew along. I'm literally just sewing along the edge of the fabric to the edge of the guide. I'll go ahead and cut that, open it back up, and pick up my next one. And you could assembly line this as well. I find for myself, if I start assembly lining, I kind of forget where I was intending to put things. So if I do them 1 row at a time, I can put it back down. So let's go ahead and pick up our next row and put that together. And one of the great things about this table runner is if you choose this layout, when you're sewing all these 3 block rows together, there is not a single, and what did I have, Pam? We had it at the top, right?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. The ladies can stop and rewind the video and see if I laid it out exactly the same way. All right. So no seams to kind of line up and match up. Yeah, that looks good. All right. So everything is going the right direction. We now need to go back over and press. So what I want to pay attention to is I'm going to have 2 points per seam that I need to get lined up. And life is so much easier if we press those seam allowances opposite. So we're going to take the seam allowance, this row here, the seam allowances are pressed up this direction. So for this row, I'm going to go the opposite direction. So that's that one, and then because we pressed that direction for this one, we'll do the opposite direction. So just alternate them back and forth. All right, so let's pick these up. And we're gonna line up our corners. And you can, this is such a short seam, you can just line up your corners. If you're like myself and you're a little OCD about wanting to get those points lined up, then I would go ahead and do just a little quick quilt tack there, just a few stitches, normal stitch length, going through that corner. And then we'll hop and do the same again. And then that way I can open it up and I can check the corners out. So if I'm happy with them, yay, I can just go ahead and start stitching my seam. If I'm unhappy, I can grab a hold of that thread and pull that thread out really easily because it's only a few stitches. And that way you don't end up having to seam ripper an entire row because you're 1/8 of an inch off. It also gives you the ability to kind of check to see if your blocks are similar sized. So you can see on this this edge here, these two blocks are a little bit longer than my top block. They may have stretched a little bit more in the pressing. So the rule of thumb is if you have a block that's slightly larger, you're always going to put that block on the bottom so it's on the feed dog itself. And then that way, as you stitch along, those feed dogs will just ease that extra little bit of fabric there in, and no one would ever know that it wasn't perfect from the get-go. Because we're not going to tell them, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll go ahead and we'll line up the other one. And so we have that row on. So I tend to press my rows each time. When I get to this point, I do tend to use a little bit of Mary Ellen's Best Press just to crisp everything up. So I'll just spray a little bit of Mary Ellen's Best Press and we'll press that. I find I get a much flatter press with Mary Ellen's Best Press. And then we are back and we're going to line up our last row. So we'll come in, we'll do a couple of quilt tacks. Open them up, check them out. So this one is perfect, but this one is off a little bit. Once again, probably not something I would necessarily notice, but because I like to have them lined up, I can just come in, grab my thread from my quilt tack, and just really easily pull that out, in theory. Usually I can just yank them out with my hands, but today it's being stubborn. There we go. All right, so let's go ahead and put that one back in. Check it out. Oh, so much better. So quilt tacks just kind of notch the quality of your quilting up. Once again, I'm going to take a look. Do I have anything? This block here seems to be a tad bit bigger. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to line that up. Put that on the feed dog like we did on the previous row. And that will go ahead and ease that in for us. It's a nice little technique to know because sometimes you're doing a quilt that you could just cut the extra off. But sometimes if you start cutting extra off, then you're like starting to cut the tips of your star off, the tips of your triangles. So knowing to just put the bigger one on the bottom will save you a lot of grief in your quilting career. All right, let's press this last one. we're going to swing over here if we could. All right, so when I'm doing a table runner, and particularly if I'm doing a charm pack where somebody else has cut my fabric, I tend to like to do just a little bit of a cleanup when I get to this point. So I'm going to take my rotary ruler. I'm going to line up so that one of the lines on the rotary ruler is going actually in a seam, and I'm going to line it up along the edge, and I'm just going to take and I'm going to trim just a tad off. We are not trying to take off the entire side of this table runner, but what we are doing is we are giving ourselves a nice clean edge in order to sew our border on. And it's amazing to me how, you know, that amount of cutting off makes it that much easier to go ahead and sew our pieces on. So our borders, according to the directions, were cut 2.5 inches. So that is basically a jelly roll. So you could, even if you had jelly rolls already, you could use a jelly roll to do that. And so we're going to come in, we're going to put our border on top, and I always like to have just a little bit left over so we can clean it up. And then we're going to do a long run down the side. And this is where the Mary Ellen's Best Press comes in. You'll find that if you pressed it with the Mary Ellen's Best Press, it's so crisp that you don't get a lot of your seam allowances flipping directions. They kind of behave themselves a little bit better. And if we're doing a quick table runner, we want it to be quick. We don't want to have to stop every single intersection on a block. So it is a line up 6 inches, sew 6 inches, and then line it up again. And you'll notice on the border, I'm not holding it. I'm not like, I don't have the death grip on it. I'm not pulling it. So if you just line up the edges and don't kind of tug at it, you'll find that your table runner will lay super flat. All right, so there's our first one. We're now going to head over and we'll do our second one. So once again, just a tad over the end so we can clean up and get a really nice square corner.
Can you show that tugging again?
Sure. So like if you have the death grip, what I would, you know, we're a little anxiety sewing there, then you tend to, your table runner doesn't lay nice and flat. Okay. So I line up about 6 inches. So those 6 inches, and then I'll line up again and sew the next 6 inches. But I'm doing a pretty relaxed hold on both the top and the bottom fabrics. Back to the ironing board we go. We're going to spray a little bit of Best Press. And then from the pretty side of the fabric, we're going to press that seam allowance towards the purple strip. flip that around and press the other side. We'll head to the rotary cutter again. We'll lay our piece out and we'll go ahead and we'll do a quick little clip off. Once again, lining up one of the lines in the seam so we're sure we're square. And we'll get rid of our extra. So that we have a nice straight edge to line up for our last bit of border there. And I definitely do this with the rotary cutter. The urge is to, like, if you have your border like this, you're like, oh, well, I could scissor cut that because I could use my Tablerunner as a guide. And no matter what I do, I'm not dead on when I do it with my scissors. So we'll come in. All right, and the last two borders. So you should have a third strip. That's 2.5 inches by the salvages, 45 inches wide. So if you cut that in half, trying to elbow my Tablerunner off from falling off the table. All right, off we go. We'll line that one up. Once again, giving myself just a little bit of extra so I can trim up and get a perfect corner. And put our last side. Back to the pressing. And one final trim. So we'll come in, we'll line up our rotary ruler, line running right along where the border is, edge of the ruler along the edge of the previous border, and we'll clean up that end. Flip it around and do it again. Our neighbor is hammering something. All right. So we are now complete with the Blissful Table Runner
That's lovely.
on there. So the size of this is 17 by 44. If you decided that you wanted to do it longer, it would really just be a case of doing more rows. And just to kind of give you an idea, the charm pack, that the Dragonfly, that had 42 pieces in it, 42 squares. So we only used 27. So we would have the potential to do quite a longer table runner. So if you're doing it on a longer table, the only thing that you would probably want to do is increase the amount of your border fabric. So I would say if I was going to use this entire pack, I probably would, round up at 1 yard. You probably end up using somewhere between 3/4 and 1. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this. It's certainly a quick project. Could knock it out in an afternoon. We're now ready to layer up, and you'll see this in a next video.